What is going on, everybody? Julio here. And if you're watching this video, I'll go ahead and make the assumption that you want to learn how to create a responsive website. Well, if that's the case, then it's your lucky day. Because in this lesson, I'm going to be guiding you step by step, start to finish, on how you can create something beautiful just like what you see on my screen. As mentioned, it's going to be responsive, meaning that it's going to look great no matter what the device you're on. By far, my favorite part here of this website has to be the hero section, just because of the parallax effect that we have going on here. Don't be intimidated though, this is really easy to create and it only takes a few lines of JavaScript. I also wanted to point out that this design I found on figma.com. I can't remember the name of the author, but I'll be sure to link it in the description below. Other than that, I'm not going to keep you waiting too much. So if you guys want to see more videos like this one, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Also, be sure to check out my social media accounts. Now, let's jump right in. So quick side note before we begin, for those of you that want to follow along with me, I'll be placing a link in the description below to a GitHub repo where you can grab all the assets that you see right here on my screen. Feel free to pause the video and then come back once you're ready. So as far as going over what we have here, this is just a basic HTML5 template. And then right here, we are importing the fab icon, which is this really small image that shows up on the tab. Then we have the remix icons, which is what we are going to be using to generate such icons that you see right here as the account icon, hamburger menu, the X, and even the arrows, although we're going to be using slightly different arrows for this. And then finally here we have our own CSS file, and the same thing here at the bottom we have our JavaScript file. So we'll start with the header, and if we go back to the design again, as you can see, we don't really have much going on here. We just have a navigation with the logo and some nav links. So we are going to start with the header tag, the class of header, the ID of header. The ID here, I'm only going to be using it for JavaScript purposes so that I can select this particular element. You can do this with the class as well, but I think it's just a lot cleaner if I just do it with the IDs. Personal preference, you can use the class if you want to. Then in here, I'm going to have the nav tag with the class of nav, as well as a class of container. So the container class here is only going to be used so that I can limit how wide this nav item or element, I should say, is going to stretch to. And we are also going to be using this to center the container in the middle of the page on larger screens. So inside of the nav, I want to use an anchor tag, and it will have the class of logo box. And we can point this back to the index.html just in case we wanted to go back to the home page, we can just click this. Although it's not really important because this is only a single page layout, but just in case you wanted to make this a multi-page. Then in here, we can use an image, and we are going to apply the class of logo image. Then we will go inside of the assets folder, images folder, and we will use the logo.png. Then in here, we can just use or say the MTN logo. This is just used for things like screen readers. We're not really going to dive here into accessibility, but just something you can do. Then underneath here, I'm going to use a class of menu, which is going to be on a div, as well as the ID of mobile menu. And this is going to be the wrapper for the mobile menu, as you can tell by the ID. We could do this with just the UL with the class of nav list, which I'll be putting in here, but it just means that later on we're going to have to add more CSS just to kind of reset things and position them exactly where we want them. So this is just a cleaner method. And we also have to put the X icon inside of here, which you can still do within the nav list UL, but it's not valid HTML if we do so. So here, as mentioned, we will use a UL with the class of nav list, then an LI with the class of nav item, then an anchor tag with the class of navLink. So with Emmet, you can do this a lot faster, but I just choose to do it this way so that it might confuse some of you guys, especially if you're a beginner. So I'd rather just do this one by one. So now that we have that, we can just go ahead, grab this, and duplicate it 3 more times. Then the first link is going to be for equipment. The second one will be for contact us. The third one here is going to be for blog. And finally, account. So here we will have 2 accounts. One is going to show up inside of the mobile menu without the icon, and the other one will be shown outside of it with the icon. But I don't want to see this on larger screens, so on this particular nav item, I'm also going to be applying a class of LG screen hidden. So now we need to add the close icon, so we will go outside of the UL. We will use a div with the class of menu toggle icon. Then we will apply a class of menu toggle close, as well as an ID with the same class. So you can just grab this one, paste it here, and then hit tab. Now to get the icon that we want, we have to apply the class of RI and then close line. And as you can see here on the browser, it now generates the X. So this is basically everything we need for the mobile menu. Now we have to go outside of the mobile menu div. And in here, what we will do is get the other anchor tag, which is going to be this account with the icon. So again, we will use an anchor tag here. We'll apply the class of navLink, then the class of account link for additional styles that are not related to the navLink. And then finally, I'm going to use Flexbox here. So I'm going to apply a class of place items center. And this particular class is only going to have display of flex, align item center, as well as justify content center, just so that I can center whatever items I choose inside of a particular box in the middle of it. Finally, I'm going to add a class of SM, screen, hidden, because I want to hide this particular element on smaller screens. So inside of here, we will use the class to generate the account icon. So we will say RI, account, circle, fill. Actually not fill, this one is line. And then here, next to it, we can just type in account. Now, as far as the hamburger menu, we can just copy this one because it will be exactly the same. The only thing that we have to change here is close for the class to open, and then we'll do the same thing for the ID. Then here for the hamburger, well, not the hamburger menu, but the icon itself. So to get the hamburger menu here, what we have to do is add menu for fill. Just like so. So now that we have everything we need for the header, what we will do is go inside of the CSS and just style this up because I want to take my time and break things down as opposed to doing, for example, all the HTML first and then the styles. So this way it's going to be less confusing. Now that we are inside of the CSS file, let's begin by importing the fonts. To do so, we will use that font face, and by default, Visual Studio Code is going to generate the bare minimum, which is the font family, otherwise the name of the font, and then the source, which is the location of the font. Since we are inside of the CSS folder, it means that we have to go up a directory. So to do so, we will use 2 dots, and it should be inside of the URL here. And now we can just go inside of the fonts folder and grab the Chronicle display. Then we can just copy the name and paste it here inside of the font family, and I'll do a space here. Let's repeat the same thing for the second font, which is going to be Gilroy. And then we have to change the path here as well. Now we are going to specify some custom properties, and we will do so inside of the root. Basically, think of the root as the global scope. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, for example, if you have a variable inside of a function, that variable is only accessible to that function. If you have a variable outside of a function, then you can pretty much use it anywhere else. So it's the same concept here. The benefit of custom properties is that, for example, if you have a particular color scheme, then you can just come here inside of the root. If you want to change it, then you can change all those colors and it will change everywhere in the site where you use those colors. Same thing applies to spacing as well as font sizes. So the custom properties will start with a double hyphen, and then from there you can just name them whatever you want. In this case, I'll use CRL light, and then I just specify the color that I want, which is going to be white. Now I'll do this a couple times. The second color is going to be my dark color, which is going to be 0B, 1D, 26. And then I can just modify the name here. Then for the third one, I'll call this one accent. Then the hex code for this one is going to be FBD 784. I'm going to create one for the font family. Title. And in here, we can just use the chronicle display that we have right here. So let's just copy that and paste it in here. We'll do the same thing here, but instead we will use the second font. And then we can just change title to body. We are also going to create some for the font sizes. And this one is going to be small at 1.4 rem. Then we will have several of those. The medium one is going to be 1.6. The large is going to be 3.2. And then the extra large is going to be 4.8. Now we have to change the name here as well. So MD, LG, and then XL. Let's also set one up for the margins. So this one is going to be margin bottom. Again, let me call this one small. 1.6 rem. Just duplicate it because it's a lot faster. For the second one, we can do 2.4. And then here we can do 3.2. Then we will change the name to LG and this one to MD. Finally here, I'm going to set up another one for the section spacing. Just in case that in the future, maybe we wanted to change the spacing between the sections. So for this one, we will be using padding shorthand. So we'll start with 4 rem at the top, 0 to the left and right, and then 2.5 rem to the bottom. And that's going to be pretty much it for the custom properties. Now we will start with the base styles. So for that, we will use the universal selector, apply a basic reset here by setting the margin to 0. Same thing with the padding, and then the box sizing to border box. So this basically just means that things like the borders as well as the paddings are going to be calculated within the element as opposed to added on top of whatever width or height you specify. So it just makes sizing your elements a lot simpler. Next, I'm going to select the HTML document, and here I'm going to specify a font size of 10 pixels, but instead I will do so in percentages. Reason being because things will scale a lot better, especially when you use the zoom feature here. So it's an accessibility thing. Then I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to select the body. Here we will start by selecting some of the custom properties that we created. So this one is going to be for the font family, and we can start with the font family body. Then we will go ahead and also select one for the font size. And this one is going to be font size MD. Then here, one for the color as well. So as far as the color, we will use the color of light. And then one for the background color also. And this one is going to be dark. Then we are going to set here a line height as well of 3.2 rem, which is going to equal to 32 pixels. Since we are using 10 pixels here, with the rem units, it's going to make the math a lot easier. Then I'm going to select all of my anchor tags. I'm going to get rid of the text decoration. And I'm going to apply the color light here as well. Then what I'll do is select all of my eyes, and I'm going to apply a font size of 2.4. Then also the ULs, and the list style here is going to be set to none. And that's going to basically get rid of all the bullet points that we had right there. Then I'm going to select my images, and I'm going to give it a max width of 100%, meaning that the image is not going to overflow its parent container. And then as far as the height, we can just keep it auto. So the next thing that I'm going to do now is take care of the reusable classes that we are going to be using for now. We'll have to revisit this later on. So let's start off with the container. The container is going to have a max width. Remember that I said I wanted to limit how wide it's going to stretch to. And the max width is going to be 144 rem, meaning 1440 rem. Then the margin will be 0 top and bottom, and then auto left and right, and that's what's going to center this container in the middle of the page. Then I'll apply some padding, let's say 0 top and bottom, and then 2.4 rem left and right. And that's going to give us the spacing here that we want. And if I make this bigger, as you can see now, our container is going to be centered in the middle of the page, which is exactly where we want it, right here. Let me actually make this bigger, right there. So let's go back to the editor. And now we can continue by styling the header. So we are going to go underneath of here, select the header. We'll start by applying a position of absolute. And the reason for that is because I want this header to be floating on top of my hero content, which is going to be the hero images and so on. So starting left position will be 0 as well. And then I also want to give this a width of 100%. So normally it's going to be 100% by default, but the moment you make it absolute, it's only going to take whatever width it needs for its content. And finally, I'm going to give this a C index of a high value just so I can keep this header on top of everything. Then I'm going to style up the nav. I'm going to give this a display of flex. Then I want to align my items to the center and then justify my content space between. And that's just going to give it some separation in between every single item that I have in here. Something else that I want to give this is a padding top of 4 rem. And that's just going to create some additional separation here at the top. Now I'm going to select my logo box. And I want to give this a min width. And it should be min width. And it will be 10.8 rem. Reason being because once you get towards like smaller screens, depending on the real estate, this logo can get really squished down because of the width of 100% that all the images have. So to prevent that, what I'll do is just give this a min width of 10.8 rem, meaning that it's not going to get any smaller than that. Now I'm going to select the SM screen hidden. And this is going to have a display of none, and it will basically just hide this account with icon. Then I'm going to select my boxes for the menu toggle icon. menu toggle icon, and I'm going to give this a cursor of pointer. And this is just going to give it the effect that it's clickable. And I actually should have just done this last, but let's just keep everything here together. So now we can just do the menu. And this is going to have a position of fixed. Again, starting top position, 0. And same thing here with the left. Then I'm going to give this a width of 80%. Then a background color, which is going to be the dark color. I'm also going to give this another color, which is going to be red. This is going to be temporary just so that we can see things a lot better as opposed to with this background, which blends in. So here I'm actually going to make this 50%. And then I want to translate this to the X by negative 50%. And it's going to basically center it right here in the middle within the X axis or across. So here I'm going to also give this a border radius of 0.8 rem. Again, another C index value, which is going to be really high because I want it to stay on top of all the content that we already have. Um, Before I actually forget, let me give this a padding of 5 rem all around. That's just going to give it more size here. What I want to do next is select my nav list. Actually, I'm going to be selecting the menu here as well. And then the nav list. And the reason why I'm doing them together is because they both share the same styles here. So as opposed to typing all the styles here and then having to do them again for the nav list, I would rather just kill two birds with one stone and do them together here. So that's going to be display of flex. Then I'm going to change the flex direction to column, align my items to the center. And then I also want to apply a gap here, which is going to be the separation. So the spacing here. And then now the only thing I have to do here is simply just position this X right here on the top right. And that's going to be pretty straightforward. What we need to do here is select the menu toggle close, give it a position of absolute. Top position here is going to be 1 rem, and then 1 rem to the right. Just like so. Now we have the X exactly where we want it to go. Finally, I'm going to select the nav link. I'm actually going to position it right here. Nav link. And the letter spacing here is going to be 1 pixel. Just like so. So the only thing that we have to do now is basically just make this menu work by clicking on the hamburger menu as well as the X. So now that we can see everything perfectly fine, what we can do here is hide the menu itself. But first, let me just get rid of this background color because we don't need it anymore. So here we can say negative 100%. And then we can come down here. Let's create a little comment here. So menu JavaScript styles. And before I get OCD about it, let me actually just capitalize the J and S. And what we want to do here is move this menu back down when it has the active class, which is the class that we will apply through JavaScript. So to do that, what we have to do is select the menu, and then we can chain the menu opened class. And what we can do here is say that when the menu has the class of menu opened, then we want to position the menu 10 rem from the top. And let's see how that looks. So let's go inside of the main.js. And what we are going to do is define some variables. So const, here we can say open menu icon. And here we can just do document dot get element by ID. And then here we can pass in the ID that we want to grab. In this case, it's going to be for the menu toggle open, which is going to be the hamburger menu. Then we have to do the same thing for the menu icon close. And here we can change the name as well. So close menu icon. Then here we can just call this one mobile menu. And this one will be selecting the mobile menu. So now that we have those variables in place with the elements that we need, we can go ahead and apply an event listener on the open menu icon. So open menu icon, add event listener, it's going to be a click event. So here what we can say is click, and then here we can just have a function. And this arrow function is just basically going to toggle a class. So in here, what we want to do is say that the mobile menu class list dot add, and the class that we want to add is going to be menu opened. So for the time being, let me just go ahead and see if this actually works. And it does, as you can see. Now this button doesn't work, so let's go take care of that. So I'm just gonna copy this, paste it down below, and this one is going to be for the close menu icon. And in here, what we want to do as opposed to add, we want to remove the class. So let's see if that works. And they both work. Now let's go ahead and animate this. So we have to go back up to the menu, and here we can add a transition over 0.5 seconds, and it will ease. So now if we click it again, it should animate in, and that's exactly what we wanted. But as you can see, it's blending in with the other background way too much, so I think we should do something different by adding an overlay. So to do that, we are going to use the header element, and then we are basically just going to create a pseudo element for it. So since this is going to fall under the JavaScript styles, this is exactly where I'm going to place it. So I'm going to select the header again. Let me not forget that this is a pseudo element. In this case, I'll use the after. I'm going to set the content property to be an empty string. Position is going to be fixed. Starting top position will be 0. Same thing for the left. The width will be 100%. The height is going to be 100 of the pH. And then here we can set a background color, which is going to be a transparent black. So we are going to be using an RGBA. And then here we can use 0.95 for the alpha. Now I also want to set a C index of a higher value than the header has, so I'll use 1500. Now to hide this, what I want to do is set the opacity to 0. Now the element itself is still there. As you can see, I can't click on the icon. That's because it's still on top of it. So to make sure that we can solve that, we can do a transform scale and then set this back to 0. So now the element is like shrunken down to a point that it's no longer there. I mean, it's there, it's just not clickable. So now we can freely click the elements that we have right here. So what we have to do now, well, let me actually add the transition first for the animation. What I want to transition here is the opacity. And then again, over 0.5 seconds. So now to sort this out using JavaScript, what we will do is say menu opened. Actually, let me get rid of the first one. So menu opened, and then header after. So what we want to do here is turn the opacity back on. And then we want to turn the scale back on as well. So transform scale back to 1. And that's pretty much it as far as what we need. So the next thing that we have to do to make this work is go back inside of the JavaScript. And to actually get the overlay to work, we have to select the header itself. So let's create a variable for the header. And we are going to call it header overlay. And then here we can go ahead and select the header. And now that we have that, we can just come down here. We can duplicate this, change the mobile menu to the header overlay. And then we can do the same thing here at the bottom. Well, first let's duplicate it. And we can change the mobile menu to header overlay. So now when we click on the, for example, right here on the hamburger menu, it's going to add the class of menu open to the header, which is what we have right here. So when the header also has the class of menu opened, we are going to target the header after and then basically just turn on whatever we turned off over here, which is the opacity as well as the scale. So now if we go ahead and click this, it should work. And just like so, as you can see, everything is working just fine. We get the overlay when we open it, and then when we close it, we get the overlay to go away. So that's going to be it for this particular portion of the header slash navigation. The next step is going to be going back inside of the index.html so that we can continue working on the hero section. So now that we're back inside of the index.html, let's scroll down a bit, and underneath of the main comment, we will use the main tag and apply the class of main. Then inside of here, what we want to do is have a section, and this section is going to have the class of hero. Inside of the section, we are going to have a div with the class of hero container, and then the class of container, as well as the class of the grid. So right here, I chose to just give this another container class, more specifically so that I can select this without having to go basically inside of this particular container and having to override some styles or add some additional ones by overriding the class names. So it just makes it easier to select this particular element without having to alter the styles that this one already has or having to change some classes. And then the grid, this is just going to be a class that I will be applying display of grid and reusing it throughout this particular project. Now, inside of the hero container, this is where all of my data is going to be. So if we go back to the design and we take a look at it, this is where we are going to be placing all this data, the hiking guide, the title, as well as the button. So to do that, I'm going to open up another div, and this one is going to have the class of hero data. I will also be applying the ID here of hero data since we are going to be manipulating this through JavaScript. So once in here, I'm going to have a span with the class of tagline, and it will simply just say a hiking guide. And underneath of here, I'm going to have an h1, and this h1 is going to have the class of title as well as main title. And for the text itself, we can just say be prepared for the mountains and beyond. Then finally, we are going to have an anchor tag with the class of btn, and then another class of btn scroll down. And for the time being, we can just use a placeholder here, but we are going to come back later on and revisit this particular anchor tag. Then here we are going to say scroll down, and we will also have an icon with the class of ri. And for the icon itself, we want the additional arrow and then line. And that's going to actually, I think I messed it up. So it's arrow down. Forgot to specify the direction. And now it shows up perfectly fine. Then we have to exit outside of this hero container, which is this div. And then right before the closing tag for the section, we are going to have all of our images for the hero section. So let's use the image tag, and then we are going to apply a class of parallax img, and I'm going to apply an additional class of parallax img top, and I'm going to apply an ID here of sky. So we will go inside of the assets folder, images folder, and grab the hero top image. So now that we have that, we can just kind of duplicate this, and then we can just make changes. So this one is going to be middle. The last one is going to be bottom. Now we have to change the classes here as well to middle. The ID for this one, we can say mountains. And then the ID for this one, we can just say grassland. Just like so. And this is pretty much going to be actually, let me just change this out. And I should just use img here at the end. So let me just copy this and do the same here as well. So the same for the bottom, just like so. So now that we have everything that we need for the hero, we'll go back inside of the main.css so that we can make this look better. So let's scroll down here to the hero section, and we are going to start by giving the hero a position of relative. Actually, I have to make sure I select the hero first. So the hero is going to have a position of relative. And the reason for that is because the images that we have right here are going to be placed absolute. So I want it to be absolute to this hero section. Then I also want to give the hero a fixed height. So the height here is going to be 100 rem. Then underneath, we are going to kind of just create another overlay here for the hero section. So we will use the hero after, set the content property to an empty string. Position here will be absolute. Starting top position 0. Same for the left. Then as far as the width, 100%. Then the height will be also 100%. Then for the background color, we here are going to have a linear gradient. So actually, for that, we need a background image. And then we'll specify that we want to use a linear gradient, which we want to rotate by 135 degrees. And it will be an RGBA. And it's going to be a transparent black. And the alpha here is going to be 0.6. Then for the second color, we are just going to say it will be transparent because we don't want to see it. And then here, as far as the position, we'll say 77%. That's just going to clear it up, as you could see there, a little bit. So now that we have that, we'll go underneath and we are going to set a C index of 50 because I want it to be on top of the content here. Then, now that we have that, we are going to select the hero data. And in here, what I'll do is add a padding top of 5 rem. Actually, not 5, 15, because I want it to be really big. Then I'm going to set a position of relative here, and the purpose of the position relative is just so that I can apply a C index here, so that I can place my text on top of the overlay, just like so. Underneath, I'm going to select the tag line. And what I want to do here is give this a display of inline block, because by default, the span is going to be a display of inline. So using display of inline block, it's just going to basically respect the paddings and margins that you apply. So the next step is going to be the font size, which is going to be one of our variables. In this case, the small one. Then for the color, here we can use the accent. And we also want to set here a text transform of uppercase, a font weight of, let's do something like bold. Let's set the letter spacing. And here we can do something like 4 pixels. Then, as far as the margin left, we will set this to 5.5 rem. Then for the margin bottom, we will set this to the variable of margin bottom small. And finally, this is going to have the position of relative because I will be using pseudo elements to kind of just draw the lines that we have right here on the design. So to do so, again, we are going to select the tag line. In this case, let's just do it before. It doesn't really matter. Then here for the content, we have to set the empty string again. The position will be of absolute. Let me actually scroll this down a little bit more. Then what I want to do here is give this a top position of 50%. Then as far as the left, we will do the same thing that we did for the margin, but it's going to be negative, so 5.5 rem. Now we are going to give this a width, 4 rem. Height is going to be 2 pixels. Then the background color here, we can just use the accent. And something else that I want to do is translate y, negative 50%. And this is just going to basically perfectly align it here in the middle. So that's going to be it for the tagline after. Now I'm going to select the title. And the title is going to have a font family, which is going to be the title font family. Then here, what I want to do is add a font size of large. Then the font weight here is going to be light. And light actually is not working, so let's just specify something like 300. And that works. So after the font weight, we want to text transform capitalize. And that's just going to capitalize the first letter of each word. Then for the line height, here we can do 1.3. And then we are going to add some margin bottom. And this one is going to be the MD value, just like so. Now we are going to specifically target the main title because we are going to have several titles within this project. This one is just going to be specific to the hero. So for the main title here, what I want to do is just simply give this the font size of extra large. And that's everything we need for that. Now we are going to style the BTN. And it's the same deal here. Since by default it's going to be inline, we are going to be doing inline block. Then I want to align items to the center. And the next thing that I want to do, actually it's not inline block. What I want to do is inline flex, which kind of works similarly, except that as opposed to inline block, now we can also use the flex properties. So as you can see, the text is now perfectly aligned with the icon. The next thing I want to do here is add a font size, and it's going to be the variable for the medium text. And then here for the font weight, I'm going to be doing bold. Finally, I want to add a gap. So the gap here is just going to add some separation between the text and the icon. And this can just be 1 rem. So what I want to do now is position all of my images. So to do that, we are going to select the parallax image. This is going to have a position of absolute. It will have a left of 0, a width of 100%. The height is going to be 60 rem. We also want to object fit cover. And then the object position is going to be 30% and then 50%. So that's going to go basically from top and bottom to left and right. Now we kind of have to position each image individually, which is why we gave it individual classes. So the first one is going to be the parallax IMG, actually bottom. What was the name again? I know I changed them. So it's parallax middle, bottom, IMG. So here we want to do bottom IMG. And this one is going to have a top position of 55% and a C index of 110. Then for the parallax middle IMG, we want to do a top position of 35%. Then finally here, we want to do the top. So let me actually just copy this. And as far as the top, we don't have to do any particular value other than 0. Just like so. And now we have the images exactly where we want them to be. The last thing that I want to do here is select the main. And actually, I'm going to go back to the top. And right here. And I'm going to give this an overflow of hidden. The reason being because once we start scrolling with the text, then it's going to basically just keep scrolling all the way to the end. So using the overflow hidden, it's just going to hide it. So now that we have that, how about we make this work using JavaScript? But before that, let me just set up a test div under here. So I'm going to set that to test, and it's going to be empty for now. We are just going to create basically some scroll bars. And it doesn't really matter. We can give this the size of 1000 rem. And now we have plenty of room to scroll. So next, I'm going to go inside of the main.js. And what we are going to be doing here is selecting each individual element that we have so that we can create the parallaxed scrolling effect. So first, let's actually define some additional variables here. So we need a variable for the grassland image. So actually, let me just call this grass image. Document get element by ID. And here we can pass in the name of the ID for this image, which was grassland. Then we can do the same for the other images. So the second one here is going to be for the sky. And this one is going to be for the mountains. Now all we have to do is just switch the names. So we can call this one actually sky. And this one can be mountains. So now that we have these values, we also want to store the value of the hero data inside a variable. So const. We can call this hero data. Again, document get element by ID. And this one had the ID of hero data. So we are going to go under here, and basically what we will do is add an event listener to the window. Add event listener, And this particular event listener is going to be not click, it's going to be a scroll. So basically, it's going to trigger when we start scrolling. And then here for the arrow function. So what we want to do in here is basically grab the scroll position on the Y every time. So if we go, for example, here, and we define a variable called scroll position, and we store the value here of the window scroll Y. So if we go ahead and basically console log this, we can see what it's doing. So scroll position. And let me make this bigger. So obviously it's not going to look very good, but that's why we have media query. So later on, we are going to take care of that. So now if I start scrolling, you see how it's keeping track of it right here, judging by the values. So that's exactly what we want. So going back here, what we want to do next is say that my grassland image, what I want to do here is change the style, and then it's going to be the transform. And then we want to pass in the transform translate, which is going to be the value for this transform property within CSS. So transform translate Y. Now we have to make sure that we enclose this properly. Then we want to concatenate basically this value that we have right here. So scroll position. And then we want to multiply that by a really small number. And in this case, you have to play around with the values just to see what works best. Because if you scroll too fast, then all the images are just going to be moving too fast and then they're just going to break apart and it's not going to look very good. So from my testing, a value that I found worked the best for me was 0.02. And then here we also concatenate the ending here, which is going to be the percentage. And then we just close that off. And this should be within the quotation mark. And that should be it. So if we try to scroll, it's actually scrolling, as you can see, but it's not going in the direction that I want it to go. So to take care of that, we want to make this value negative. And now after it reloads, you see that it's going exactly where I want it to go. And let me just quickly demonstrate what I meant before. So if I get rid of this, just notice how fast it's just scrolling out of view, which is something that we don't want. So that's exactly why we multiply it by a really small value. So now we have to do the same thing for the other images. And in fact, it's going to be pretty similar. So I can just go ahead and duplicate this a few more times. So this one is going to be for the mountains. And in this particular situation, I want to increase this by 0.04. And now we should see the mountains moving as well. Then the next, this one is going to be for the sky image. And in this situation, I want to make this one slower. And as you can see, this one is moving as well. So with those out of the way, the only thing left here is going to be the hero data. So we are going to grab that. And in here, we want to make this one, let me see. What we want to actually do here is say that we want to target the opacity as well because we want this text to disappear. So that means that we are going to increase this by 3 and it's going to be a positive value because I want it to go down, as you can see here. So what I'll do here is also target the opacity because as I mentioned, I want the text to disappear as I'm scrolling down. And here, as opposed to the transform, we are going to grab the opacity. And at the start, it's basically going to be 1, and then we are going to subtract based on the scroll position so that we can get it to fade slowly. So let's get rid of this. And we'll say 1 minus scroll position. And then this one will make it really slow by saying 0.2. And then we can get rid of this right here. And now if we test that out, you can see that it starts fading out. And that's pretty much it for the hero section. I told you guys at the beginning, don't be intimidated. This is a lot easier than it looks. And as you can see, it only took a few lines of JavaScript, nothing complicated at all. So next, we are going to go and work on the next section, which is going to be this one right here. Again, this is pretty simple as well, so it's not going to be too hard. It's only going to take quite a bit because there's a lot to type out as far as the markup. So back inside of the index.html, scroll down a little bit, and then here we can now get rid of this test div, and then we can start working on the next section. Something here that I added in, which is not really important, is this dgrid. So I forgot that I wouldn't really be using this here, but I will be using it on this coming section. So this particular section is going to have the class of hiking information. I'm also going to apply the class of section, and I should also add an ID of hiking information. And let me actually just copy this from right here. So now that we have this ID, we can come here to the anchor tag for the scroll down, and we can just basically type it in front of the hash. And that's going to make it so that when we scroll, when we click here, it's going to take us down to the section as you just saw. Quickly, let me just go back to the body right here. Well, not the body, but the HTML document, and I'm going to add the scroll behavior smooth. So now, if we try to hit the scroll button, it's going to do so smoothly. And let me actually see hiking information right here. Test it out. Hiking information. So as you can see now, it does it a lot smoother, which is exactly what we wanted. Now we can just get rid of this. Actually, let me just get rid of it altogether. And then let's just go back to the index.html so that we can continue to work on this. So inside of this hiking information section, what I want to do is have a div, and this div is going to have the class of card container as well as the class of container. Same deal with the other container having two container classes. Then in here, I'm going to have a div with the class of card as well as the class of dgrid. So this is going to be the individual card itself. And then in here, what I'll do is have an image. And this image is going to have the class of card image as well as the class. And let me see if I can find it here. Place items center. Just like so. And as far as the image itself, we are going to go inside of the assets folder, then the images folder, and we are going to grab the number 1 image. So now we can see the image itself. So now we are going to go underneath of this image, and we are going to have a div, and this div will have the class of card info. Now we are going to have a span with the class of count. Here we will say 0, 1. Then we are going to have a span with the class of tagline again. And here we can say a hiking guide. Underneath of the tagline, we are going to have an h2, and this h2 is going to have the class of card description. And here we can just use some dummy text for the time being. Or you can just go back to the design, which again, as I mentioned, I was going to link in the description. And then you can just go ahead and actually that's what I'm going to do right now. So I'm just going to copy it from here. And was that the right one? Let me double check. Yes, it is. So what I'll do here is change it from this one. And I believe, was it this one? I keep messing it up. Let me just double check again. So actually, it's not a hiking guide, it's get started that we need right here. And we are also going to need this title, so let me just grab it right now. So here we can say get started. And then underneath of this H2, what we need to do, actually, I keep messing it up. It shouldn't be an H2. This one should be the paragraph. On top of the paragraph, we should have an H2, and this H2 is going to have the class of title, and then the class of card title. And now we can use the what level of hiker are you. And as you can see, that's starting to look pretty good already, but obviously we still have some work to do within the CSS to make it look a lot more like the design. Then finally, underneath of this p tag, we want to have an anchor tag, which will have the class of btn as well as the class of btn accent. And then here we will say, well, actually, this is just a placeholder. So for the text itself here inside of the anchor tag, we will say read more, followed by an icon. So to get this icon, we will use the class of ri. And then in here, we will say that it will be arrow right line. Just like so. Now we get the arrow here. And that's going to be it pretty much for the card itself. So the only thing we can do is just copy it, just like so. Come right here underneath, paste it 2 more times. And now we have all the cards that we need. The only thing we have to do here is to change the images, just like so. So the only thing that we have to do now is go back inside of the CSS so that we can make this look even better right now. So let's get started by going inside of this comment for the hiking information. So I'm going to select the hiking information now. And the position here is going to be relative. I want to push this up even more. So what I'll do is set a negative top margin. And it's going to be negative 12 rem. And then the C index here is going to be 500 just because I want it to be on top of things. Just like so. Then what I'll do is go underneath of here and I'm going to select the card itself. Since it already has the class of dgrid, I'm going to select it here, dgrid. And then we are going to apply the display of grid here. Since this is going to be a reusable class, what we can do is come back up here and we can just place it here. We can do the same thing for the title. And where was the first time I used it? Right here. And then we can place this right here as well. So with that out of the way, let's go back to working on the card. So for the card here, I'm going to give it a gap. And this gap is going to be 6.4 rem. Then Each card is going to have a margin bottom of 12 rem. Then I will select the card info, which you can't really see right now. So it was card info. Am I correct? Yep. So let me just scroll down a little bit. And for the card info, I'm just going to give this the position of relative because I'm going to use this number that we have right here for the count is going to be position absolute, and I want it to stay within this card info div. So the next thing we'll do here is select the count. Then the font size here is going to be 10 rem. The font weight is going to be bold. The opacity here is going to be 0.01 because we want to barely see it. Or actually, let me just do 0.1 because it was way too faded out. Then for the position here, we will do absolute. Then we will do a left of -2 rem. And then a C index of -1, just so that it stays behind the content. And something that I just realized is that I placed the wrong class right here on the card image. So it got confused there for a second. The class that I do want to apply is the following, which is frame position center, which is what we are going to be using to kind of just, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to move the frame of the image to be exactly where we want it to be. So let's take care of that right now. And I actually hit copy here instead of paste. And then we'll do the same thing for the other one. So that should be all set for now. So once back in here, what I'll do is select the card image. This will get a width of 100%, a height of 32 rem, and then the object fit is going to be to cover. Now I'm going to select the card image that also has the class of frame position center. That should be position here. And what I want to do here is say that the object position is going to be 50% and then 100%. Just like so. Now all the images are exactly where I want them to be as far as the position goes. Now I'm going to target the card description. And here what I'll do is increase the line height by making it 2.8 rem. And then the margin bottom to create some additional spacing is going to be the medium. Just like so. Now I'm going to target the BTN accent. And this is just going to have the color of accent. And that's pretty much everything we need for this one here. So the next step, obviously I didn't change the text here, but that's not really important. What matters here is the layout. Text can just be changed later on if that's something you really wanted to. So now it's time to go work on the footer. There's really not a lot going on there. So let's go back inside of the index.html and go underneath of the footer comment. So here we are going to start by having the footer tag, and we are going to apply the class of footer, then a div with the class of footer container, as well as the class of container, and then the class of dgrid. And here I'm going to have a div with the class of brand information. Then I'm going to basically just scroll all the way up since we already have this for the logo. So I'm going to grab the logo, paste it here. And what I'll do next is add a p tag with the class of footer blurb. And in here, we can just copy something from here. Let me just grab the text. And here we can say, get out there and discover your next slope, mountain, and destination, which, if we go back and look at the design, is something that we have right here. So now that we have that, I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to have a span. And this span is going to have the class of copyright. Then here we will use the ampersand copy to get the copyright icon. And then here we can say 2021 MTN Inc. And then all rights reserved. Just like so. And that's going to be pretty much it for the brand information. Then we will go underneath of this div. And we are going to have a div with the class of footer nav. So footer nav, and we also want to make this a grid container, so we will apply the class of dgrid. Then in here, I'm going to have another div. This one is going to be footer nav group. Then in here, I will have an h6 with the class of footer nav title. And here we can just say more on the blog. Then we are going to have several anchor tags in here, and it's going to have the class of footer nav link. And then the class of nav link as well, because I wanted to have the same styles that the other nav links have. And here we can just use another placeholder. As far as the text itself, we can just say test item. Doesn't really matter what we type in here. So to speed up the process, I'm just going to type in some sample text. Then what I'll do here is, how many did we have? I think we had 6. 6 or 5. Let's just do 5. And next we are going to have another footer group. So let's just go ahead and duplicate that. And this one, I had less links. So let me just do 3. And then as far as the title, this one said more on MTN. And that's pretty much it for the footer. So if we go and scroll all the way down, we have everything that we need. Now we can just go ahead back inside of the main.css so that we can style this up and make it look a lot better. So let's start by selecting the footer. And the footer is going to have a padding top of 4 rem, 0 left and right, and 5 rem to the bottom. Then I'm going to select the footer container. And the row gap here is going to be 3.2 rem. And it's going to create some separation. Then I'm going to select the brand information, and then I'm going to basically select everything that's inside of it. So every single direct child, which in this case it's going to be the logo, this p tag, as well as this copyright notice. So brand information, and then everything that is a direct children or child, I should say. And I'm going to give it a margin bottom, which is going to be the variable of MD. And I don't know why Visual Studio is doing this. Every time it reloads, it's going to basically scroll all the way back up every time. But I guess we will have to deal with it for now. Then I'm going to select the copyright notice. And this will have a font size, which is going to be the variable SM for the font. Then this is also going to have a margin bottom of 0. It should be bottom, not left. Then finally, I'm going to give this an opacity of 0.8. Now I'm going to select the, well, first let's take a look at how that looks. And it looks pretty good so far. Now I'm going to select the footer nav title. And that will have a color of accent. Then that will also have a font size of 2 rem. And it will have a margin bottom of MD. And let's take a look at how it's looking so far. It looks so good. Looks pretty good, I should say. So as far as the font size, let me see. Footer nav title should be a lot bigger. Let me just double check what's going on here. And what did I type out? So the font size here is going to be 10 pixels. Huh. What did I do? So footer nav title, let me see, because it's not taking effect. Footer nav title. Footer nav title. So I had a spelling issue, which is usually like the typical thing if it's not working. So once that's out of the way, what I'll do is select my footer nav link. And what I want to do here is the text transform, set it to, I was going to do uppercase, but I don't think this is, in the design, it's originally uppercase. Let me just double check. And no, it isn't, so there's no need for that. However, we do need to add a margin bottom of margin SM. Then we are going to select the footer links again. And what we want to do is just get rid of the padding that they already have. So we'll select the, actually, did I give it padding? I don't even remember. So let me just double check again. No, actually, I didn't give this a padding, so we are good. So I guess that's everything we need for that. Now what I'll do is select the brand information as well as the footer nav group. And here I'm basically just going to apply the styles that they both share in common. So brand information and then footer nav group. Display here will be a flex, and the flex direction is going to be column. Just like so. And it's looking pretty good. Now what we want to do is just switch the order so that we can put the brand information at the bottom. And that's going to be pretty simple. So all we have to do is just say brand information. And then we are going to change the order to 1. So by default, the number 1 order is going to be at 0. So if you do 1, that's basically number 2, if that makes sense. Now the last thing that we have to do here is select the footer nav. And we are going to give this the order of 0 just so that we make sure we don't have any issues as far as the content moving around. And then finally, we are going to give this a gap. And the gap is going to be the variable of margin bottom SM. And I keep messing this up. So margin bottom SM, just like so. So let's take a look at how it looks. And everything looks pretty good. Now let's make this project responsive. We're going to start with the media queries for tablets. So here we will say add media screen and then min width 768 pixels. Then we are going to select the root and basically update some of the custom properties. In this case, the font size XL. Here I'm going to change this one to 5.8 rem. Let me actually make this bigger. Then I'm also going to add one for the container. So container spacing, 0 top and bottom, 8 left and right. Then I'm gonna grab this one, go all the way to the top here, add it down here, and change this to 2.4. Then I'm going to find the container, and then I'll just update it here with a variable. So container spacing, just like so. Then what I want to do is go all the way back down, and I'm going to work on the hero. Comment that out. And then the hero now is going to have a height of 100 of the VH. The parallax image is going to have a height of auto. The parallax bottom image is going to have a top position of 45%. The parallax middle position, well, middle image, I should say, is going to have a top position of 30%. Then I'm going to work on the hiking information. And here, the first thing I'll do is select the card. The card is going to have a grid template columns, which is going to basically be 2 at 1 fraction each. So I'm going to use the repeat function for that. Then I'm going to specify a row gap of 6.4 rem, followed by a margin bottom of 20 rem. So let's scroll down a little bit so that we can see things better. Now I'm going to change this up once more so that it was how it was before. So here I'm going to select the card image and then the grid column. I'm going to specify that it will start at 1 and then stretch all the way across. Then I'm going to say that the width here is going to be 60 rem. And then the height is going to be 42 rem. Now I want to justify the self to the center. And now I'm going to go ahead and select the card info and do the same thing. So here we can just go ahead and copy this, start at 1 and stretch, start 1 and stretch all the way across, just like so. Now I'm going to select the count. And here what I'll do is say that the font size is going to be 20 rem. And then the left is going to be negative 8 rem. Then I'm going to select the tagline. And the tagline is going to have a margin left of, let's do 9.5 rem. Then I'm going to select the tagline before. And here, what I want to do is say that the width is going to be 7.2 rem. And then the left is going to be negative 9 rem. So that already looks pretty good. Now I'm going to select the card title. And what I want to do here is add a font size of 6.4 rem. Now I'm going to work on the footer. Here, the first thing we are going to do is select the footer container. And then we will apply a grid template columns of 0.75 fractions, and then the rest can just take up one fraction. The column gap here is going to be 6.4 rem. Although it would have been a lot easier if I just placed that in a variable since I keep using it, but I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. I guess you guys could do it later on if you wanted to. Then I will select the brand information, and then the order is going to get switched back over to 0 so that the info is back up front. Then the max width that I'm going to set here is going to be 30 rem. Now I'm going to select the footer nav. Order, I'll reset it back to 1. Then the grid template columns here. And then use the repeat function to add one fraction each. Then the same thing here for the grid, for the column gap, 6.4 rem. Now I'm going to select the footer nav link, and then select the last child. And what I'll do here is say that the margin bottom is going to be 0. Now, as you can see, the copyright also has some margin bottom, so I'm going to get rid of that by selecting the copyright. Actually, I'll do the margin top first, which will be auto. But since it still has a little bit of margin at the bottom, I'll get rid of that and set that back to 0. So that's going to be pretty much it for this particular breakpoint. The next breakpoint is going to be something like a small laptop or something like an iPad Pro, which is somewhere around that size. So now let me actually grab this portion of the media query and paste it down here. Close that up. And now the breakpoint that I'm looking for right here is going to be 991 pixels. Again, we are going to start by updating some of the root values here for the custom properties, which again, in this situation is just going to be the font size, XL. And I keep forgetting. So 7.5 rem. Then again here, now I'm going to work on the menu. Since we have plenty of room now, we can show the links here. So this would fall under the header, menu, and then basically we are just going to reset this. So position is going to be back to initial. Then the transform will be back to initial as well. The width, same with the background color. Then the padding or radius. Then the transition. And then finally the margin left. Now I'm going to select the menu again, as well as the nav list. And then here we can change the flex direction back to row. And then the gap is going to be 0. My next selection is going to be the LG screen hidden, since we don't want to see, for example, these icons as well as this link. So LG screen hidden. And what I'll do here is say display of none. And I can do this with the menu toggle icons as well. Just like so that I can get rid of them. One more thing that I want to add here is that I want to show the other nav link that I had before, the one with the icon. So SM screen hidden. Here I can say display will be set back to block. And that's just going to show this. As far as the other styles that we need, I'm going to briefly style the nav links. So nav link display here is going to be inline block. The font weight is going to be set to bold. And then the padding top and bottom is going to be 0.8 rem and 2.4 rem left and right. Then I'm going to style up the account link. And what I'll do here is set the display to be of inline flex, just for alignment purposes when it comes to this icon. And then I want to align my items, align items to the center. And then give it a gap for separation. I'm going to select the account link again, and then the icon inside of it. And the font weight here, I'm going to set it to 300, just so that it's lighter. So the last thing that I want to do is also get rid of the padding that this has. So I can do that here. Padding, set it back to 0. And now I'm going to set the hover effects. So the hover effect, I'm going to start with the BTN, then the BTNI, and then finally the nav link. So here I'm going to set the transition, 0.5, well, transform, 0.5. Then I'm going to select the BTN on a hover, and then the nav link on hover, and the color here is going to be the accent, and should be working, and it is. Next, I'm going to animate the arrows on the buttons that we have right here as well. So to do that, I'm going to select the BTN, accent, on hover, I. And then what I want to do here is transform, translate X, 0.5 rem. So now if we go down here, this should be working, and it is. Let's do the same thing for this one, which I probably should have done before. This one is BTN, scroll down. On hover, and then the I here, we have to make it on the Y. And now if you hover over it, you see that the arrow moves down. So that's pretty much it for that. Now I'm going to add some styles here to the hero. So let me make an additional. Actually, I should have made the comment right around here. Well, I guess it doesn't matter because we have a lot of things that are mixed up here. So let's just focus on what we have right now. So for the hero here, I'm going to select the parallax image. And this one is going to be for the bottom. Top position, I'm going to change it to 60%. Then the parallax middle, I'm going to make this top 40%. Now I'm going to select the hero data. And what I want to do here is give this a top position of 45%. And then I want a max width of 79 rem. And then I want to justify self to the center. Next, we are going to work on the hiking section. So just like we did before, we are going to create a comment for it. And in here, I'm going to select the hiking information div, and then the margin top, I'm going to get rid of by setting it to 0. Then the padding top here, I'm going to increase it to 10 rem. So now that we have that, I'm going to select the card. And what I'll do here is set a column gap of 8.1 rem. Now you're not going to see much change right now, but you will once I reset the card image and card info position. So card image, what I'll do here is say that the grid column is going to be set to initial. Then what I'll do is set the order to be of 1. Then the width is going to be 48 rem. The height is going to be 68 rem. And then justify self end. Now, as far as the card info, what we will do here is say that the grid column is also going to be set to initial. And then I want to align self to the center, just like so. Next, I'm going to add a class of order first. And then the order here is going to be 0. And I want to justify this one start. So justify self start, just like so. And what we are going to do now is apply this class to this one right here because we want to switch the image around. So let's find the second one. So number 2, right here. So we want to apply this to the image right here. So let's say order first. And now the image is going to be moved around. Next, what we are going to do is work on the footer. And what we will do here is another comment. And then the footer container, grid template columns. Here I'm going to repeat this 2 by 1 fraction each. And then the column gap is going to be set to 0. Let me take a look really quick at the footer container from before. So it doesn't seem like we did anything at all. Footer container. So we had that, which is pretty similar. So what we did here was only increase the size to 1 full fraction. Now I'm going to select the footer nav group. And this, I'm going to justify self end, just like so. So if we go ahead and make this bigger, as you can see, it's going to look pretty good, just like in the demo. The only thing we have to sort out here is just the height so that we can place this actually in the middle. So to do that, I'm actually going to have another media query. So let me just grab this. And I'm going to paste it right here. And what I'll say is that the hero data is going to have a top position of 50%. So let's see how that's going to look. And nothing happened. Oh, now I know why. So remember that I had mentioned that we didn't really need the display grid on the hero container here. Well, we actually do. That's the reason why things are not moving exactly where we want them to be. So see how like after I did that, it now moved. So with that out of the way, the only thing we have to do left is just move this a little bit more. So for that, we'll just select the count. And here we'll set the left to negative 10 rem. So now if we look at the finished product, everything looks pretty good. Everything works, the parallax. And if we go into the responsive view, we can look at smaller phones. Everything still looks pretty good. And yeah, that's going to be it for this particular tutorial. I hope you found it useful, learn new ways to create layouts. And if you did, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe if you still haven't, and check out my social media accounts. There's sometimes I post announcements on there, so if you don't want to miss something, make sure you follow me. Other than that, thanks for watching. Guys, have a good one.